Hey everybody, Daniel Franklin here, SouthernCharmHolsters.com. I was going to share with you a little bit about becoming Pop. Now, my original Pop was my grandfather. He went by the name Pop, and you hardly ever found him without a red hat on. But in this picture, and this has to be an old picture because my mom is a little girl in it. There's my Uncle Ronnie, there's my grandmother. And there's Ernest Inman, my Pop. You look at him, he looks a little gangster in that picture, don't he? He's got his cigar and his hat cocked. But I always knew him as the older man with the red hat that would do anything in the world for me. And May 7th of this year, I got to become Pop. Have my own grandson now. And yesterday I was outside back behind the house sitting there by the fire pit, and I looked across and I got a groundhog on the other side of the branch, and I seen him, and it reminded me of the pet groundhog Pop had. Now Pop had this groundhog that he caught wild. It was not a tame groundhog. No one else dared touch him. His name was Chucky. Well, one day Pop is sitting on the porch in his rocking chair. Of course, he's got his red hat on. He always had a farmer's tan. He was always dark brown because he was always outside in the garden or whatever. But he's sitting there with his shirt open. And in his lap, he's got this groundhog. And he's petting this groundhog. And this groundhog isn't tame now. He's wild as can be, just about. Pop's the only one that could handle him. Well, Pop had this friend, George. And George was coming over. And George had a drinking problem. He was an older gentleman, and he always had a drink. And so George was a little bit on the loud side, and he's coming up the steps, and that groundhog bites Pop right in the belly. Pop just keeps petting him. I'm sitting over here on the other side of him watching him. And George hasn't even seen the groundhog yet. He comes up and he sits down by Pop. And he looks over and he says, "GD, Ernest, there's a groundhog biting you." Pop's got blood running down his belly, and he's still petting the old groundhog. He looks over at George and says, "George, just be quiet. He'll let go in a minute." He just kept petting that groundhog, never did flinch. But that was a guy he was. I seen a feller slam his thumb in the tailgate of a truck. He slammed it shut. It didn't close, so he opened it and slammed it again for Pop to move his thumb. He moved it out of the way and said, "You got my thumb." He's sitting there bleeding. I mean, he just stoic. He didn't flinch hard at stuff like that. But I asked my sister if she minded if I took over the name Pop before my grandson was born, and she said she didn't, that she thought it was a fine thing to do in his memory. And up here's a picture of him with his dog. He loved rat terriers, and he loved cigars, and I'm afraid them cigars shortened his life, but that was Pop. I have a knife over here that my dad gave him. I was probably in, I don't know, second or third grade when he got it. And Pop always had goats, milk goats. My grandmother got on to him one time about drinking so much milk late at night. Not that she cared he drank milk, but it was bad for him. So he went out and bought him some goat milk and said he'd drink all the milk he wanted. But here's his old case knife. You can look at it. It looks like he wore down quite a bit. I remember the day that Dad gave this to him. That blade's broke. I know Case has a good warranty. I could probably send it in, but this will never be sent anywhere. Now and then I'll do a little Black Widow holster. It's got a knife spot on the side of it, and I'll mold it with that knife. And right here's his driver's license, issued in 1969. Ernest Leroy Inman. Miss you, Pop. But I figured if I didn't tell some stories on YouTube, my kids might not ever hear them, and if I put them on here, then someday they might be bored walking through and find a story about their Pop. Now, Pop, I'll tell you one thing he did. He used to pull tickets. And you don't know what that is. You're watching a baseball game, and it was illegal, I'm sure, but statute of limitations have ran out, and that's been 40 years ago or more. So I don't think anyone would care me telling the story. But over in Canton, North Carolina, there used to be a pool hall. And you go in that pool hall, I can remember going into it as a little kid with Pop. He'd go over there, and the man would be sitting there by the window. And the man would look up the steps. He'd look out across the pool hall. But then he'd look out the window. And he'd say, "All right, Ernest, it's clear. You can go on up." And Pop would go up there, and then there was this little man sitting there, and he had his little book he had on. And Pop would pull some tickets. And what it was he's betting on the baseball games. And he lost a lot more than he won, but if he ever won anything, I might get a little something out of it. He'd go buy me something, but it was quite the thing going in there to the bookie. Now, Canton flooded. I figured that pool hall probably flooded last year or when Helene came in. But the paper mill up there is closed now. My dad worked at Champion, was the paper mill up in North Carolina, and it closed for the last time last year. He moved down here. We moved down here in, at the end of '89, I think it was. I was 15 years old, moved to Alabama. He went to work at the Cortland mill, and that mill closed. But he was able to take a retirement, so Dad retired from early retirement from the mill, and they dismantled it and moved all the paper machinery over to China. But that's the story of Pop and his groundhog. Hope y'all enjoyed it. I'm from the mountains of North Carolina. That's why I talk the way I do. I got a little thing up here. Right there's Asheville, Canton, Waynesville. I grew up in Waynesville. When I was growing up, Waynesville was this smaller town, and I lived on 106 Orchard View Drive. And when I was little, you could look over and you could see the top of the orchard. Well, they took that orchard, that hill up there where the orchard was, and they leveled that sucker off, and they put a big shopping center up there on it. The thing is the sheriff department would confiscate a lot of marijuana every year, and they tended to burn that stuff back behind that orchard. Well, once they built the orchard up, cut it down, and made the shopping center, I reckon the sheriff's department didn't see any reason why they'd change the way they do things. So after they'd opened a grocery store up there one year, they went back at the bottom of that hill on the other side, and they burned all that confiscated marijuana. Well, it came out in the paper the next couple of days after that the deli had sold out. But things changed. That place has grew up. Houses everywhere. They're always working on the roads. My sister still lives in North Carolina. She's up there. She said that there's always road construction going on. Things getting bigger. In Alabama, I see a lot of houses now popping up. There used to be fields. I had a buddy that me and him used to run around riding gravel roads when I was a teenager, and you can't find a gravel road now. But that's progress. Things change, things go on. Here I'm sewing some loops. These are going to be for a little 5-inch K-frame holster I'm building today. I use my laser to mark. I work these patterns out where I know the thickness of the base, and I use a splitter. I split down the top piece of leather to the right thickness where these loops will be just right when it's done. I cut everything out of one piece of leather, but sometimes you need a little different thickness. If it's too thick on your top, it's hard to bend it and get it to sew right, and it'll throw off the diameter, inside diameter, and your shells will be too tight. So whenever you're working a pattern, you gotta keep in mind what thickness of leather you built that pattern to, because if you change the thickness, you will change the specs that you worked out and make it too tight or too loose. Something to keep in mind. Well, y'all, I guess I've rambled enough here. I hope you enjoyed the story of the groundhog. Pop was in the sea bees, and I don't have any stories about that time in his life. I know he did have a spot in his eyelid, how he got it injured somewhere. Dad said that he ran a tank into the wall and they sent him home, but I don't know the whole story about that either. I might have to ask him sometime. But y'all, if you've got any stories that you'd like to tell your kids someday, maybe put them on YouTube, share them with everybody. That way they'll be around. If we don't start making an effort to keep some of the stories, they're all going to be gone. Y'all have a wonderful day, and come back and see me, and I'll show you this holster when I'm done. I've got to get off here and get busy working, but it's nice talking to you. Bye.